Good afternoon and welcome back to the continuation of the presentations. Dr. Deborah Duffy will talk about the import and interstate transport of organisms and vectors of infectious diseases of livestock and poultry. Dr. Duffy?
Thank you, Lourdes. Welcome back, everyone. I work for the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, in the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, APHIS. I work for a program called Veterinary Services, and within Veterinary Services, I work in the National Import-Export Service in the Organisms and Vectors Permitting Unit. I'm here today to discuss organisms and vectors permitting. I'll give you a quick overview of the hierarchy under which organisms and vectors permitting falls, and we'll discuss our mission. I'll discuss the authorities under which we conduct our permitting. I'll cover the application process, the items that we regulate, best practices for applicants, and I'll provide tools that might be useful to applicants. The Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service of the United States Department of Agriculture exists to protect the health and value of American agricultural and natural resources. There are 6 programs within APHIS. The programs are Animal Care, Biotechnology Regulatory Services, International Services, Wildlife Services, Plant Protection and Quarantine, and Veterinary Services. You will hear today from the APHIS program's Plant Protection and Quarantine and Veterinary Services. I'll present for Veterinary Services, Organisms and Vectors, and Shirley Wager-Paget will present for Plant Protection and Quarantine Pest Permitting. Veterinary Services' mission is to safeguard the health of animals, people, and the environment. Veterinary Services has 4 pillars. Permitting is performed in 2 of the pillars, National Import-Export Services and in the Science, Technology, and Analysis Services pillar. Within National Import-Export Services, there are 3 permitting groups: live animal permitting, animal products permitting, and organisms and vectors permitting. As a brief overview, live animal permitting permits importation and interstate transit of live animals and germplasm. Germplasm includes semen, embryos, and hatching eggs. Animal products permitting permits importation of materials derived from animals or exposed to animal source materials. Materials that require a permit include animal tissues, blood, cells, or cell lines of livestock or poultry origin, RNA or DNA extracts, hormones, enzymes, monoclonal antibodies for in vivo use in non-human species, and certain polyclonal antibodies. Organisms and Vectors provides import permits and interstate transport permits for organisms and vectors of livestock and poultry diseases. The Center for Veterinary Biologics, CVB, is housed in the Science, Technology, and Analysis Services pillar. CVB has a permitting group that permits imports of biologics to assure pure, safe, potent, and effective veterinary biologics so that they are available for diagnosis, prevention, and treatment of animals. Our authorities are derived from the Animal Health Protection Act, which authorizes the Secretary of Agriculture to make and enforce regulations that are necessary to prevent, detect, control, and eradicate diseases and animal pests. Included in this regulatory authority are animals and articles which are in or affect interstate and foreign commerce. The Virus Serum Toxin Act authorizes the Secretary of Agriculture to regulate quality of veterinary vaccines and biological products in order to ensure safe and efficient supply. Included in this regulatory authority is importation of affected agents. The Code of Federal Regulations, 9 CFR, Parts 101, Definitions, 104, Biological Products, 122, Organisms and Vectors, and 123, the Virus Serum Toxin Act rules, are the codifications of the above administrative acts. In an effort to protect agriculture, and specifically livestock and poultry, Organisms and Vectors Permitting regulates the importation into the United States and interstate transport of organisms and vectors pathogenic to livestock and poultry. As I just mentioned, we regulate organisms that cause disease in livestock and poultry. We also regulate vectors that carry both foreign and domestic diseases. Vectors include insects, infected or exposed animals, or animal products. We make sure that proper biosafety precautions are in place to safely handle the organisms or vectors for the particular use for which they are intended. And we keep a database so we can trace organisms if necessary. One of our major duties is to ensure biosafety. Inspections are one way of ensuring this biosafety. The inspectors at the National Import-Export Service Centers around the country provide inspections for materials requiring Biosafety 2 and 2 Plus, and Animal Biosafety Level 2 and Level 2 Enhanced. The select agent inspectors and the service center inspectors provide inspections for materials requiring BSL 3 handling. Inspections impact processing time of applications because applications are held until inspections are completed. Here's a brief overview of the application process. An applicant submits the application form, the VS Form 16-3. The applicant can decide to submit through the electronic process, e-permits, or can submit by fax or email. For us in organisms and vectors, the entire process is conducted within e-permits. Submission through e-permits greatly reduces the processing time. After receipt, the application goes to data entry. Here, the application is hand-entered into our system, if it doesn't come in through e-permits. The application is reviewed and clarified if needed, fees are paid, and jurisdiction is evaluated. Next, the application is assessed for completeness, and there may be some questions and answers that go back and forth. The draft permit is constructed based on which organisms and vectors are requested, where they're coming from, whether or not they were exposed to risky animal materials during processing or shipping, their intended use, and what type of facilities are needed to safely handle the organisms. If inspection is required for the materials to be transported or imported, an inspection is initiated at this stage of processing. As mentioned earlier, inspection must be complete before the draft moves forward in the process. Once questions are resolved, the draft permit comes to the veterinary medical officers. We review the application and documentation and look at such things as the biosecurity of the applicant's facilities, intended use of the material, country of origin of the materials, disposal method, and we verify that organisms and vectors permitting has jurisdiction over these materials. After approval, the permit is processed and mailed, faxed, and/or emailed to the applicant. Some best practices in the process include applying through e-permits. Electronic submission significantly shortens the time needed to process the application and eliminates data entry errors. It is also helpful to review the no permit required guidelines. These guidelines spell out which materials do not need a permit. If no permit is required, there is usually some documentation like a statement or certifications that should be included with the shipment. It's always a good practice to include the printed guidelines with the shipping documents. The permit is either an import permit or a transport permit. An import permit is for movement of materials into the U.S. to the applicant. Transport permits are for transportation across state lines to the applicant. The restrictions are more stringent on import permits. The permit is for movement, either interstate movement or importation, and receipt of the organism. We've recently noticed that some applicants are renewing permits so that they can possess the organism or to change the use of the permit. For example, changing in vivo use from one livestock animal to another. So long as the restrictions on the permit are adhered to, renewals of this nature are unnecessary. To reiterate, A permit is only required to receive regulated material via import or interstate transport. Import permits require more information from the applicant than transport permits. The sooner we have complete information, the faster we can process. A few examples of the information we need for import permits are: we need a full description of the organism. That means genus and species for bacteria, and the full name of the virus. For example, an applicant could request an influenza virus described as Influenza A, Puerto Rico, 834 H1N1. In the case of bacteria, the applicant must verify that the organism was subcultured at least 4 times prior to import. We need to know the country of origin to determine if there are diseases endemic to that country that we might be concerned about in the imported material. We need to know if there are any animal origin nutrients or media that came in contact with the organism. And we want to know if there was exposure to livestock or poultry. The reason we want to know these things is the National Import-Export Services classifies countries according to their disease status. As an example, let's say that country A is known to be affected with virulent Newcastle disease, a poultry disease considered a select agent in the US. Viruses that were grown in eggs or egg products originating from country A would not be allowed into the United States unless the material was safety treated or safety tested at our Foreign Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab. Another example, a common nutrient, fetal bovine serum, is acceptable if it originated in the US, Canada, Australia, or New Zealand, because these countries are considered free of foot and mouth disease and other diseases of interest. The disease status of the exporting countries can be found on our website in the Animal Products Manual, Appendix C. The method of inactivation should be provided if the material or components are high risk or if the material comes from a country endemic for select agents. Here are the directions to the web information. You'd start at usda.aphis.gov and drill down into imports and exports, then animal and animal products. The list of foreign country disease status and the no permit required guidelines are here. If you click on organisms and vectors instead of animals and animal products, you'll find contact information in various permit forms. We are currently revising our site content for organisms and vectors. This is in an effort to improve and streamline our permitting process. We are always happy to answer questions before, during, or after the application. Contact information is listed on this slide. And I'll be happy to take questions at the general question session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Daffisey. Now we have another USDA's guest speaker. Dr. Shirley Wager-Pagier will discuss pest permitting policy in protecting American agriculture and environment. Dr. Pagier.
Thank you, Dr. Mueller. And I want to thank the CDC for inviting us to participate in this important session. My name is Shirley Wager-Pagier. I am the chief of the Pest Permitting Branch for Plant Protection and Quarantine, PPQ, USDA APHIS in Riverdale, Maryland. And first I want to talk a little bit about our authority. And it's under the authority of the Plant Protection Act, the Secretary of Agriculture may prohibit or restrict movement into or through the United States or interstate commerce, including territories and possessions of plant pests, plants and plant products, and associated articles. This authority is to prevent the introduction into or dissemination within the United States of a plant pest or noxious weed in order to protect plant health. This authority also includes, under the plant pests, select agents. PPQ issues permits for the movement of commodities, including fruit, vegetables, plants, wood, and wood products. And these commodities are intended to be free of plant pests. Therefore, they will not be discussed further in this presentation. The The Pest Permitting Branch issues permits and other documents authorizing the movement of plant pests. Permits include requirements that provide the appropriate level of safeguarding to prevent the dissemination of these pests into or through the United States. Impediments to foreign commerce and travel are minimized whenever possible. That is because we are issuing permits for a wide range of plant pests and federal noxious weeds that have varying levels of risk. The implementing regulations are found in Part 7, Code of Federal Regulations 7 CFR, specifically 7 CFR 330 and 360, which provide the specific authority to grant plant pest permits. A Part 330 permit is required for the importation or interstate movement and subsequent movement of plant pests, biological control organisms, and associated articles. For instance, soil would be considered an associated article, or some of the plant pests are imported into the United States or move interstate with host materials that are required for their life cycle. And sometimes these host materials are also regulated articles. Similarly, a Part 360 permit is required for importation, movement interstate, or release into the environment of federal noxious weeds. Customs and Border Patrol enforce these regulations at U.S. ports and border crossings. Well, who needs a plant pest permit? Any U.S. resident who wants to move live plant pests, biocontrol agents, parasitic plants, federal noxious weeds, or soil into or through the United States requires a permit. PBQ uses the e-permits database to process permit applications, which you have just heard that process described. That's the same one that is used by veterinary services. The permit holder is the responsible party and not the exporter or shipper, and permits are non-transferable. We have permit types according to movement. Permits are issued for, as we said before, interstate movement, importation, environmental release, and environmental release includes field studies and continued curation of the following: invertebrate organisms and arthropods, plant pathogenic microbes, which are fungi, viruses, and bacteria, nematodes, mollusks, federal noxious weeds, soil, and biocontrol organisms. Some of these organisms are also regulated by other federal agencies, and we often consult with those agencies when developing permit requirements. Plant pests can be designated either direct or indirect plant pest. An example of an indirect plant pest is a vector. We also may be an impact on a beneficial organism, such as a pollinator, would be an indirect effect on plant health. Continued curation extends the retention of a regulated article. The permit types according to intended use are as follows. For research in lab, growth chambers, and greenhouse, field research, which is typically restricted to 10 acres or less, organism isolation and identification and/or taxonomic studies from soil and other related materials, diagnostic samples for identification of plant pests, organisms for taxonomic studies, evaluation of microbial biopesticides and biocontrol for their biocontrol properties. Some of these are permits where the plant pest identification and taxonomy are unknown. Basically, their diagnostic are the isolation, identification, and taxonomic studies. We have a requirement that after the studies are completed to identify the plant pest, that another permit is sought for its use after it's identified. There are additional intended uses for regulated organisms and associated articles: religious and cultural purposes, educational use, commercial sale and distribution, display, human and animal consumption. In this category of intended use, these tend to be lower risk organisms, and often they are being released into the environment. Intended use is a contributing factor to the potential plant health risk associated with regulated articles, and we regulate them on the level of risk presented. The following are the regulatory decisions that we make following the receipt of an application. They could result in the issuance of a permit, denial of the application for a permit, withdrawal or voiding the application, which is done by the applicant, generally after some discussion with us, cancellation or suspension of a permit, that's post-issuance, if something is found that safeguarding cannot be maintained, or a letter of no jurisdiction or a letter of no permit required. And I'll go into these in a little more depth. The regulatory decision to issue a permit happens after evaluations and reviews. The permit applications are completed, and it will specify the required safeguarding for the purpose of preventing the dissemination of plant pests into the United States. In the case of, say, for instance, a select agent, some of this evaluation has been done prior to the application, and there are lists. However, for the majority of plant pests, the evaluation is after we receive the application. Some of the pests are well known, are in our database, and others are new to the permitting process and require a further evaluation. Permit conditions provide the required safeguarding measures to ensure safe movement, containment, use, and disposal of regulated articles. This includes the type of movement that can be included, such as hand carry, whether we require bonded carriers, also the level of containment, packaging during movement, and the treatments or types of disposal so that the pest is devitalized prior to disposal or during the disposal process. We also deny permits, and an application for a permit will be denied if needed safeguards cannot be arranged to prevent dissemination of plant pests into or through the United States. We also have two other documents that we use. The first is a letter of no jurisdiction, which is issued if the article is not a plant pest or biocontrol organism. This letter helps to facilitate the movement of organisms through the port of entry because it indicates that the organism has been evaluated and we have found that it is not a plant pest. However, in that letter, we may direct the applicant to other agencies where we believe that the organism may be regulated. A letter of no permit required may be received for proposed movement of certain organisms recognized as common and widespread within the United States, generally organisms that are cosmopolitan. Our authority is very broad, and it includes all plant pests. It does not exclude those that may be low risk. Interstate movement, we do have policy. The Plant Protection and Quarantine does not have the authority to regulate interstate, that's within the state, movement of organisms, unless a federal permit was previously issued for the organisms. And that says that the organism entered the state from without, either another state or an importation. The original permit must be amended or a new permit issued for this movement. The new destination and permittee information will be included on the permit, as well as the origin, intended use, and movement type previously authorized. And this is a way of tracking the permit from the entry through its disposal. About 50% of our permits require containment. Containment facilities are required for pests that are assessed by the pest permitting branch to be medium to high risk to agriculture or the environment. These plant pests need special containment features and or handling procedures that will ensure that they are not disseminated into the environment. We have about 4 different levels. We do not use the BLS criteria for plant pests. However, the highest level is equivalent. Containment, there are many considerations. Containment is typically required for organisms of foreign origin, dependent upon the plant level of pest risk and the consequences of unintended release. Therefore, are there host materials within the country? It says presence of hosts, climatic and ecosystem factors. In North America is primarily a temperate country. There is not as much risk if we have tropical organisms, but that is evaluated. Mobility of the plant pest, spread, airborne, waterborne, and vectors. Likelihood of introduction, establishment, and spread if released into the environment. And that would be unintended release. So we would look at the likelihood of its ability to escape. And the availability of treatments to devitalize the organisms, and that would also be are there pesticides and so on available if there should be a breach. Compliance and enforcement. Customs and Border Protection and PPQ field operations staff perform inspections and identifications. They are responsible for enforcement actions pertaining to noncompliance that are taken at the port and border crossings. PPQ personnel work in 17 plant inspection stations located throughout the United States. PPQ field operations and headquarters staff are responsible for conducting periodic and unannounced compliance inspections of containment facilities. These are generally our permits are 3-year duration. Inspections are annually or could be more often. Violations of 7 CFR 330 in field locations are referred to APHIS's Investigation and Enforcement Services or the Smuggling Interdiction and Trade Compliance staff. Thank you. We also have a customer service number, which is listed, both a direct number and a toll-free number. And we also have an inbox if you prefer to send email to us, and we will get back to you in response to your questions or concerns. And listed also at the end of this presentation are a number of URLs for additional information on our webpage. And I will be happy to take questions during the question and answer period. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wager-Pagier. That was very informative. Before I introduce the next speaker, I'd like to remind the registered participants to please submit your questions to ipwebcast@cdc.gov. That's ipwebcast@cdc.gov. Still another new speaker this year is Dr. Romelito Lapitan from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. He will present border management and control of imported materials. Dr. Lapitan.
Thank you, Dr. Mueller. And thank you for inviting me to this presentation. It's a pleasure to represent CBP in this forum. I belong to the Agriculture Programs and Trade Liaison Office with the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. And just a little clarification, when you talk of Customs and Border Protection, we are the folks that man the ports of entry. Now, there's also, we are the ones that wear black uniforms. There's the Border Patrol that wears the green uniform, and they're the ones that mans the borders that's in between ports of entry. Today I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to give you insights on the regulatory and enforcement roles of CBP, but I'm going to be specifically focusing on the missions and the agriculture mission of the Agriculture Programs and Trade Liaisons Office. I'm going to be also talking about our partnership and alliances with other agencies, and some of the regulatory requirements from CBP perspectives on the importations of infectious biological agents, infectious substances, and vectors. So I'm going to be limiting my presentation to that window. Because I can also talk about the plants and animals, but for this presentation, I'm going to limit my presentation to the biological agents. And then I'm going to give you examples of some of the enforcement actions that we have done in the past, and recommend at the very end some of the, and this is what we do for to our trade stakeholders to recommend what are those things that can possibly facilitate processing of their entries through ports of entry. APTL within Customs and Border Protection provides leadership, the expertise, and innovation in protecting American agriculture and natural resources. We have four divisions under APTL. The Agriculture Oversight Protection Operation ensures that there is consistent implementation of inspection procedures at the ports of entry. The Ag Policy and Planning provides guidance to our agriculture specialists, to the cadre of agriculture specialists we have manning the border on pest exclusion. And the Ag Safeguarding ensures compliance of agricultural trade in a cargo environment. And we have another division called the Ag Bioterror Countermeasures, which I presently lead, and we develop programs to prevent deliberate entry of biothreats and other potential tools of ag and bioterrorism. So from this, you can deduce that APTL covers both compliance and security, which is security being part of Customs and Border Protection. APTL manages a cadre of agriculture specialists that are manning our ports of entry across the nation. We operate under statutory authority of 7 and 9, Title 7 and Title 9 under the Plant Protection and Animal Protection Act, respectively. So CBP oversees all imports and agriculture's APTL oversees all agriculture imports. And we support other federal agencies as well as state agencies and assist them in the enforcement of their own import regulations. And in so doing, we actually network with the intelligence community to also perform that role, as well as with trade, to make sure that they are in line with us, in tune with us, in getting through legitimate trade process. One of the agencies that we support is CDC. CDC provide us guidance, for instance, in importation of materials such as, or animals such as dogs, and materials such as bushmeat and NHPs, or non-human primates. They also directly communicate with the Office of Field Operations within CBP, and at the DHS level, they issue alerts, alerts on disease outbreaks to Office of Health Affairs, which is also part of the whole Department of Homeland Security. We have about 328 ports of entry. About 15 of them are in the pre-clearance stations outside of the United States. We have a cadre of 2,400 agriculture specialists scattered all over the nation at different ports of entry, and they're staffing about 180 of them. No worries about that, because APTL develops training modules to actually train officers that are manning those ports of entry without agriculture specialists on agriculture procedures. If there's any discrepancies found that's related to agriculture, they have to refer that to agriculture specialists for adjudication. We have talked about this, and apparently this doesn't apply anymore as far as restrictions on where select agents can go through. So apparently now select agents can go through any of the ports of entry. All biological imports, such as select agents, toxins, etiologic agents, cell and tissue culture, and so on and so forth, are required to file a formal entry. You can do this yourself, being the importer of record, and or you can do this through brokers. Brokers can easily facilitate this. But one of the requirements that CBP has are advanced notification, and this is not just CBP requirements, but this is also a Bioterrorism Act requirement, or we call BTA. For instance, the entry should be filed in air cargo no less than 4 hours prior to arrival, in land border and rail no less than 2 hours, and in sea no less than 24 hours. Now, CBP also developed programs we call Trusted Trade Program, like CTPAT, which stands for Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism. What that program is, it provides opportunity for like importers, brokers, and so on and so forth, the trade operators, to actually enroll in this particular program and have shipments or entries pre-cleared, so that when they get to the ports of entry, processing is facilitated. And if you notice that when they're enrolled in a CT path, it only requires 30 minutes notification. One of the reasons why we require advanced notification is because we do advanced screening. Understand that we only have so many officers as well as agriculture specialists in the fields, and we get millions of entries per day. So advanced screening is a way by which we can actually adjudicate low-risk shipments. That way, when they get through the ports of entry, then release is facilitated, and we can only focus on those high-risk shipments. Upon arrival, all agriculture imports are actually referred for agriculture inspection. When we get, for instance, biological packages, when we get biological cargo, we don't physically open them, but we do document review. And document review pretty much is looking at all the documentation that should associate or should be accompanying the shipments. And this includes Form 2, letter of authorization, letter of no jurisdiction, permits, and there's some APHIS requirements like some letter of declaration indicating, for instance, like if you're importing cell or tissue culture for human in vitro or in vivo research, then they should not come from a facility that's processing, say, chickens or poultry that may have exotic or Newcastle disease. If everything is okay and compliant, then they're conditionally released into the United States. Conditionally because we have CBP reserves 30 days to recall that shipment if later on we found some derogatory information associated with that shipment. However, if there's some discrepancy, what we do is we make arrangements with the broker and importer of record and refer the shipments to either CDC or VS, depending on whose jurisdiction it is, for adjudication. Now, do biological entries get into a passenger environment like airports and seaports? Yes, they do. In fact, a lot of the enforcement actions that we have are actually in a passenger environment. Now, like in cargo, CBP had developed programs for trusted travelers. In the case of air travel, we have developed the global entry, and we also have the automated passenger control, which is available for USCs as well as Canadians and those citizens of visa waiver countries. What that does is they actually go into a separate lane, and they have a kiosk where they run their passport, and the machine runs their biometrics, and the machine then spit out a receipt that they hand over to the officer at the egress, in which case there are times that they get into some random questioning. But that's all that happens, and then they exit the premise. Those regular travelers, like foreign nationals, for instance, go through the primary lanes for admissibility checks, as well as passenger screening, asking them for declarations if they're bringing any fruits, vegetables, or any biological products. If they're not bringing in any quarantine materials or prohibited products, then they're good to go. But one of the things that we have as a second layer of checks are we have canine rovers around the airport or around the vicinity to actually make sure that if there's any undeclared items on the baggage, then those little guys can detect them. That's a second layer of checks. In the land border, we have also Trusted Traveler program. In the Canadian border, we have the Nexus, and in the southern border, we have the Sentry. It's essentially the same theme as the global entry, where they go on a separate lanes. But at the same time, in the land border, they do go through admissibility checks too, because we do get a lot of foreign nationals coming through the land border. If there are QMIs or quarantine materials or biological products either found or declared, then they go into agriculture inspection. They go into intensive questioning, more intensive questioning, and all their luggages go through X-ray or non-intrusive inspection. If there's any QMI, they're seized. If there's any biological import, then we go through the same requirement as that in cargo. We look for permits and other materials or other documents that should accompany the shipment. If and then we refer them to CDC or VS, Veterinary Services, or the local veterinary medical officers for adjudication. If they're okay, then they're released, and if they're not, then we transfer custody for adjudication by USDA or CDC. Now, I mentioned about something materials that should be declared, because if those materials, if for instance, if there's undeclared quarantine materials on baggage that was detected by canine, then that may result in some CBP action, which is usually a penalty prior to release. International garbage is one of the critical pathway for and potential entry pathway for like pathogenic pests and diseases, and it's one of those things that we highly regulate. And in collaboration with USDA, we develop compliance agreements with carriers, with haulers, and with incinerators to make sure that, and also we develop training and materials, training programs to make sure, and guidance to make sure that those international garbage are properly disposed. If we found some high-profile interception, like for instance an actionable pest or a first-time interception pest, which is new to science, or a select agent coming through a passenger environment, then it generates what we call a significant agriculture incident report. This is some kind of alert that's generated and circulated within CBP to make sure that everyone is notified about it. Because one of the things that we have found out is port hopping, and that's one of those things that we're trying to make sure that we have a good handle of. It also generates what we call an AEA, which is Agriculture Enforcement Alert, which is a watered-down version of the SARE, and we distribute this, we disseminate this to partner federal agencies as well as state agencies. We generate this twice a week. Enforcement action. This is one of those things that we do. This is an example of one of them, like a traveler coming from Peru on a bus via Mexico, entering Laredo. He declared that he's got some pharmaceuticals in there, which happen to be vaccines, Bacillus anthracis, all those virulent ones, although these are probably the weak viruses because they're vaccines, but they don't have any permit. This would generate that SARE. One of the unique thing about this traveler was that with that declaration, we were forced to actually inspect the luggage, and we found out a lot of undeclared QMIs. This generated penalty. One of those things that are close and dear to CDC are bushmeat. We get that a lot through ports of entries like Washington, JFK, and Atlanta from countries, Western African countries, as well as Central African countries. So we seize them and refer them to either Fish and Wildlife and transfer custody to Fish and Wildlife and CDC. In conclusion, just to summarize and reiterate, the role of CBP, we oversees all imports and we assist all other federal agencies, and I think there's about 47 of them, in enforcing their import regulation. But it is the other agencies like CDC, for instance, that has statutory and regulatory responsibilities for protecting humans, in the case of FDA, the food system, and in case of Fish and Wildlife, endangered species. And one of those things that we put together to take as a take-home message to the trade stakeholders is that be familiar with the guidance that's put together by the regulatory agencies, because they're the same guidance we enforce at the port of entry. Like if they need all the documents that should accompany the shipment, make sure that they're all in there. If it requires to be conveyed or carried through the air environment or cargo environment, then it has to go through that, and the kind of carrier that it should go through. And just be aware that in the process, if there's any discrepancies found, then it's going to cause a lot of delays. The notification requirements, just make sure that you meet that notification requirements per BTA and customs requirements, because those are the ones that should be, there's no movement without satisfying those requirements. And the earlier presentation actually had shown that you have to input the port of entry where it's going to go to. If there's a discrepancy on that, say if it's going to go to, Minneapolis and it happens to land in Arizona, there is a problem. There is an issue, and that's going to cause delay. And again, we kind of recommend to subscribe and enroll in our program because that would benefit a lot. And I'm sure a lot of you as travelers have gained from being or from having enrolled in global entry, especially if you're going through new work. That should help you a lot. And with that, I say thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Dr. Lapitan. That was informative. Um, Again, before I introduce the last speaker for today, reminder to our registered participants, our lines are still open for questions. Please send your questions to ipwebcast@cdc.gov. Again, that is ipwebcast@cdc.gov. No spaces. Although the system may not be perfect, the importation of biological select agents and toxins over the past decade has been extremely safe, and out of nearly 200 biological select agents and toxin imports, there has not been a single incident of theft, loss, or release. Safe and secure importation of biological select agents is a complex and important process. As society continues to evolve, we should expect to see increasing importation activity of biological select agents and toxins and other hazardous substances. That is why ongoing intra-governmental activity, such as development of the ITDS, will be critical in improving the system. Today's webcast itself is a great example of this intra-governmental collaborative activity. We will continue to work with partners within and outside the government to improve the safety, security, efficiency of select agent transfers and other critical imports. Having said that, our last speaker for today, Bill Stevens of the Department of Transportation. He will discuss DOT's safety regulations and requirements for transporting infectious substances. Bill?
Thank you, Dr. Mueller. Thank you, Von McClee, also, and the CDC folks for inviting us to be a part of this. DOT, PHMSA, Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. We do a lot of outreach throughout the country, and this is part of it so that we can get out there and help you gather the information for transporting infectious substances or any other hazardous materials out there safely for the public. And speaking of that, I myself, Bill Stevens, I'm the national team lead for the Select Agent Program within the DOT. I have 5 regions total, and there's 4 other investigators like myself who have been trained to do specific select agent inspections throughout the country. I have trained them personally, and we are out there to see the facilities that do these shipping items. Want to make sure for safe transportation, obviously. This particular guidebook that we put out is free of charge, and you can get it off of our website. You can order hundreds if you like and distribute it out. We want you to have the information. So this is where your tax dollars are going. But if you follow this little pamphlet guide that we have out here, you don't need me up here. It's basically what it amounts to. Everything I'm going to be telling you today is coming out of that pamphlet. Unfortunately, the CDC has only allowed me to talk for about 20 minutes today. Okay, in doing so, we're going to have to cut some of my other programs short because I normally talk about Cat A materials, I talk about Cat B, regulated medical waste, and some other issues, particularly about how we conduct inspections. You're getting the short version today. We've got objectives, just like everyone else. We're going to provide an overview here of the regulatory requirements for your 6.2 materials. We're going to talk about your package selections, your marking of these packages, and labeling, your shipping paper requirements, emergency response information, very important, and of course for the transportation security plan and training requirements. So we're going to go through these because this transportation security plan is much different than the CDC or the APHIS security plan. We do regulate this 49 CFR for governing the packaging and safe transportation out here in the public community. We want to make every shipment safe. There are something like 1.5 million shipments of hazardous materials every year. That's an awful lot to govern and to make safe out there on the road. But it does come out of this little pamphlet here, the CFR 49. So if you're not familiar with that one, you're more familiar with the 7 and 9, let's add this one. Category A, infectious substance, that's what we want to be speaking of today particularly. Of course, it is the 2814 and 2900 Class 6.2 materials. Packaging requirements. This is in your 49 CFR. If you take nothing away today from my part of the presentation here, take these references in our regulation. The general packaging rules. Whether it's a spec pack or a non-spec, if you're shipping hazardous materials, know that section because they're general in nature. The requirements for all hazmat, regardless, is the next one. Changes regarding infectious substances and mixed contents. And then you have exceptions under 173, 134, which will let you out of some things, but not necessarily select agent stuff, obviously. The category A, select agent material, it could be a category A infectious substance and not be a select agent, but a select agent is an infectious substance affecting humans. 196, 197, 199, which we are not going to be talking about, and then the tests and requirements for these particular packages that you need for select agent shipping. Your category A packaging. Y'all seen this? This is in that little pamphlet also. It is basically what we want to call a triple pack. This triple pack is made up of your infectious substance being inside of a vial. You'll have some absorbent material in there if it is a liquid, of course. If that vial were to break, we want it absorbed and be safe. We want your packaging material, bubble wrap or something, around that vial or 2 vials or 3 vials, possibly with bubble wrap, to keep it from shifting around inside the inner package, your secondary package, which must be watertight, okay? The secondary packaging, whether it's going by air or not, must meet air transportation requirements for a pressure differential package. Your plastic bag or your can must be pressure tested and certified for a different altitude. Okay, 95 kPa pressure pressure difference. Between the primary and secondary packaging, once we close it, put the secondary in the outer package, we're going to put our list of contents in there. That's normally where your Form 2 goes and any other information you want the receiver to have. Okay? And then your package, of course, is labeled appropriately with your infectious substance label, which changes October 1st of this year, about 3 weeks ago. Make sure you are using the appropriate ones because we will write that violation up because it has been there for a while and coming forth. Now it's mandatory. It is a UN specification package. In this particular one, it is marked UN 4G Class 6.2. This particular package is only for infectious substances. It has been put through rigorous testing, back on the preceding slide of 178.609, to where there was a 30-foot drop test performed on this package after it was frozen, or a 30-foot drop test after it was watered down for an hour to simulate 2 inches of rainfall got on it. We're going to drop it from 30 feet. We're going to drop a 15-pound rod onto the package from 4 feet and see if we can bust that package and get to the inside there where the vial is. There are rigorous standards that must be passed in order to get this classification. Okay? Very rigorous packaging. That's why it is a safe package. Okay? A very well-known carrier who's wanting to get into the business had the DOT there. We were there from the southern region to represent and explain to them the safety elements of this package and why their people should not be afraid to handle it. Okay? Your marking on the package. Real quick, like this is your certification that it did undergo the testing requirements of 609 with a 30-foot drop test. We get a 4GU. 4G tells me it's a fiberboard box. The U tells me that it was tested with a very fragile inner package inside there, i.e. glass. Did it pass all the required tests and didn't break the glass? We can submit now and put a U there, which means you can put any kind of inner package in there that you want. A plastic bottle, a metal can, any kind of inner package to hold your product will go in that box. If it does not have a U, you will have to do it with the tested package it came with. And it may be a plastic bottle with a wide lid on it that comes in a kit, if you will. Don't substitute the inner packaging. That will get you in trouble quickly. Class 6.2, obviously again, very specific to infectious substances, Cat A material. We will have on there the year that it was manufactured. Combination package must be manufactured within 2 years of a particular test date. Okay, so that test date's only good for 2 years on the test report, and during that manufacturing process, he can make a whole bunch of them, okay, and not use them till 5 years later because he made so many of them. That package is still good, okay? It's still good because it was tested. It's still made that same way it was originally done 5 years ago. USA, and then the test report number. The plus tells me it's a third-party tester. Someone out there who's in the testing program business, he has put these packages through all the tests. Plus AA identifies who he is, in this particular case, a company up in Minneapolis. And then his test report number. I can call up the company and say, send me that test report number, and I'll have it on my phone in just a few minutes so that I can check to see if you are using the right inner packaging for the material or for the package. Okay? We can find out thus whether you are using a certified tested package. So a Class A package here is very important. Do not substitute the inner packaging. Testing of packages. We talked a moment ago. We're going to wet that box for an hour to represent 2 inches of rain on that thing. And then we're going to subject it to a drop test. We're going to freeze it down to 0 degrees and then subject it. We're going to drop that 15-pound rod on it. We're going to put dry ice in there if it does call for it and thus certifies it. And then, of course, the variations to get the U. We can use a smaller inner package. Instead of a half-gallon bottle, maybe we can go to a quart bottle. But it's got to be of the same makings of it, the same cylinder size, the same wide openings of it. It just can't be something little now just because you want to throw something in there. It's got to be of similar design. Watch yourself if you change the inner packaging. You can put less number in there. Obviously, it may have been tested with 10 vials in there. Okay? You can put less in there. It's not a problem. Marking requirements. On the package, we're going to put the proper shipping name, UN 2814, which will be infectious substances affecting humans, UN 2814, and no technical name. No technical name is going to go on the package. Okay? Why? We don't want Joe Johnny out there handling this stuff to know necessarily what's inside of it. Okay? Continental U.S. shipments and all, leave this name off the package. CDC, this works with them. This is our exception, but it lets CDC now have their policy for lost in the crowd. We want that Cat A package to look like this Cat A package that has a select agent. Okay? We don't want anybody to know the difference. Who needs to know the difference? The shipper and the receiver. Okay? The shipper, constantly information, identification, infectious substance label, the orientation arrows if you need it, and your dry ice label if you need that one also. So that's your package marking requirements. There's your label. It changes first. And basically what it does is take off the notify CDC if there's any package damage. Don't call them on regular infectious substances. Okay, they don't want to hear it. Your shipping papers. You got to have shipping papers. You've got the identification number first, UN 2814. Proper shipping name again. Here's the technical name problem again. Don't put the technical name on the shipping paper. Where does the shipping paper go? On top of the package, okay? If we don't put it on the box, why are we going to put it on the piece of paper that goes on top of the box? Okay? Don't tell them. Let's keep it lost in the crowd. So we can and must put something in there. So we have, in the regulations, suspected category A infectious substance to go in your parentheses for your technical name. So something must be in there, and our regulations tell you to use this, and we will help the CDC out. Okay? We got a hazard class. There's no packing group. We want to know the type of package and your unit quantity. It's a box, okay? It's a cylinder, whatever it happens to be. Your shipper certification and your emergency response telephone number. This is about what it would look like. And let's back up one here. And very important about the emergency response telephone number. If you put one on there, if you put your cell phone on there, you live with that thing until the package has arrived. And I mean literally live with it. That means go to the shower with it. That means set it beside your bed. That's the number that they are going to call if there's an incident out there and they want to know what they got and how to handle it. Okay? Or you can use Chemtrek or Infotel or any one of the other emergency response people. Okay? But who knows better about what they actually have than the shipper? Very important. Your security plan, mine is different than yours is with the 7 or 9 CFR. I want to know your transportation security elements. I will look at your security plan and I will try to drag out elements in there that would meet our requirements. And I'm also going to suggest to you, how about putting all of this good information, do a cut and paste and do it in another tab for us? Because I don't want to go through all that stuff that the CDC requires. All right, put it simple. But your plan, just like the CDC, you have to have in it a risk assessment, okay, for transportation purposes. What could happen? What do you have? How could it get away? Your assessment of risk, you're going to address personnel security. You're going to tell us what measures have you got in place to ensure John Doe that you're going to let him work back there is a good John Doe. What kind of background checks are you doing? Your DOJ, your SRAs, all of this. Put this in writing, but put it in my side of the plan so I don't have to dig for it. Okay? You're going to address unauthorized access. Yes, you're going to give me something in general about your key cards and your locks and your eyeball identification, whatever it is going to be, to include how does a visitor get there in the first place. Okay? If you tell me on a security plan that all visitors will have their photo identification checked and you don't do it, you've got a violation right there. You failed to comply with your security plan. Okay? And I'm going to be looking at it. And if I get there and spend 3 hours or 4 hours with you and all I showed you was a business card, you got a problem. You got a problem. And of course, en route security. How can I cover en route security? I don't carry it. I don't transport it. But you go to that carrier, FedEx most of the time in this country for ground and air, and you get a letter from them saying that, hey, I do comply with the 49 CFR for en route security plan, and I have a plan in place. That's all you can do, okay? Because you don't carry it, actually. You don't say, I don't pick up hitchhikers, I don't stop for lunch, I leave the truck locked. I do all of these different things en route. Because you have to say, how do I make myself confident my product is going to get from A to B? All right, tell me that the CDC says, hey, there's a Form 2 involved. The entity that wants it contacts them. The entity that sends it, they communicate back and forth. Tell me all of these things. When you send it and you give it to that FedEx guy and you hold your breath, tell me that. Okay, until that receiver gets it, signs it, an authorized receiver, and then calls you back and say, I got it. Tell me those things in general. I happen to know it, okay? Excuse me, put it in writing. Put it in writing. Other requirements that we have is hazmat training. This comes under 172.704 in our regulation. Everybody has to have hazmat training. This is a hazardous material, okay? You're going to tell us about general awareness and familiarization. Have you taught that person how to read the 49 CFR when it comes to a hazmat table? Have you taught that person how to make shipping papers? If he can't read the table, he can't make a shipping paper, okay? Have you taught him what kind of labeling goes on the box, marking goes on the box, and the box itself? What specifics do we need and classified as general awareness? Safety, OSHA-related HAZCOM right-to-know program. Function specific, the person closing that UN certified box has to close it a certain way with a certain tape or a certain method. Has that person been trained on how to close that package? And maybe it's one or two persons in the whole operation. They need function specific training for closing of that package or documenting a shipping paper. Document that training. Security awareness. We've got a free CD that'll help you out. It's 18 minutes long, got a 10-minute question at the end that says, look over your shoulder. Be cognizant. In-depth security. If you have a security plan, which the only reason you have to have one is you ship any amount of a select agent. Not just infectious substance, only a select agent requires a security plan. Train the people on the security plan who have a need to know. So anyone shipping infectious substances must be trained, to put it mildly. Covered a lot real quick, obviously, about the shipping papers, the packaging going on, the training requirements, the security plan. These are all things that we inspect for when we go to your facility. This is our help desk in DC. They have a lot of very informed people up there, to include people out of the standards office and one of our attorneys. They're there during the course of the day up till 5 o'clock local time, maybe 4 o'clock, up 5 o'clock. And they will be very helpful to you if you do have any questions. That's my information there, and we'll be sitting on the panel in just a few minutes, so we'll do questions then. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
And thank you, speakers and presenters, for providing our audience with a wealth of information. Now we are open for the question and answer sessions. If the SMEs please take your seats. Miranda Scott will preside the question and answer session.
Good afternoon. Our first question for the afternoon: how far in advance should an applicant submit an application for an import permit?
Well, I'll attempt to answer the first question, and I'll allow my colleagues from APHIS who also issue permits to answer that question. Typically, we ask that the applicant submit the application with at least 15 days in advance if it's not inspection required. However, if you are renewing your application, we ask that you submit at least 2 months in advance to prevent your permit from expiring, to give you an adequate amount of time to receive that import permit.
For veterinary service permitting, we ask 6 weeks in advance. We try to get them done in 2 to 3 weeks. If you want to submit early, they can go in a queue and wait. And for example, you can apply 2 months in advance or 3 months in advance, but it'll sit there in the queue waiting for that 6-week period.
For pest permitting, it varies. Usually the average is about 60 days. However, if it's for field release or requires containment facility inspections for a first-time inspection, it may take longer, and certainly contact us by those contact numbers provided, and we can begin to work with you ahead of submitting an application to determine what would need to be done.
For animal importations, we generally ask for 2 weeks in advance. We almost always get them out sooner than that, but in case we have staff shortages or whatnot, we try to get them in 2 weeks. For registration for non-human primate importers, that's a much more difficult and lengthy process. Probably you would want to be thinking about 3 to 4 months at a minimum for that.
Our next question. As part of the CDC inspection process, should the information for the inspectors include occupational health measures and medical surveillance details?
As for the CDC's inspection process, we're mainly concerned with biosafety measures and ensuring that you have the proper biosafety measures in place for the material that you're importing. So those biosafety measures can include occupational health measures that you may have in place, and also medical surveillance that you may have in place for your staff.
Under 42 CFR 7154, is there a requirement to report laboratory incidents that result in a potential or known occupational exposure and or environmental release to the Import Permit Program?
No, at this time, under 42 CFR 71.54, that is not a requirement.
Please clarify the correct party authorized to issue and sign the permit not required certification statement.
Or for the CDC's import permit regulations, it only applies to applicants or importers within the U.S. Our regulations do not apply to foreigners. So for those specific regulations, that certification statement, which is stated in the regulations themselves, are only for importers within the U.S., so that would be the recipient. There are times, unfortunately, where we have an importer who is a sender and a recipient. That's mainly for individuals who are collecting samples out in the field and importing them back into the U.S. For receipt at their laboratory. But as far as our regulations and the certification statement, it applies to individuals in the U.S. only.
Can the APHIS permit system be used for select agents?
No, there is a separate select agent permitting process. It should go through that.
Will CBP maintain the materials at the appropriate storage temperature as written on the box while they are quarantined?
When we intercept any material that other agencies have jurisdiction to, we transfer custody to the regulating agency. We do not have the facilities to actually store any biological materials at the ports of entry. The only facility that we have to store any interception are live birds. That's the only ones that we've got.
What if you do not know the port of entry for the specimens you ordered?
For the CDC, if you do not know the port of entry, we do allow you to include unknown in that specific section. As far as filling out the application, we do ask that you provide a port of entry, but there are times where we understand that you are not aware of which port that the material would enter. So we do allow the ability to include unknown in that section.
For APHIS, if you do not know the port of entry, there is a function you can write as applicable.
Section A on the CDC Import Permit application is designated for the permittee, which has been defined only as the person requesting the permit. The address entered in Section A must be the physical address where the product will be worked with or stored. What if the importer or owner of the materials for which a permit is required is sending the materials to a third-party storage facility?
If that importer is sending that material to a third party, that third party should be included on the final destination section of the application. Section A is specifically for the location where the material will be received initially, but we do allow the flexibility for you to provide us additional recipients of the material that you may have collaborational activities with. And so in that final destination section, you would include that third party and inform us of that third party in that section.
What is the purpose of bacteria subculture at least 4 times before importing?
That would be for APHIS. Yes. We want to make sure that the cultures are pure cultures. There's no contamination.
Will renewal inspections be conducted by CDC inspectors? If so, how often?
At this time, we're considering conducting inspections on a 2-year cycle. Right now, that is our plan. I'm not sure of a definite time, to be honest with you. But right now, we're hoping to do renewal inspection on a 2-year cycle.
Is there regulation of sea turtles by any agency other than CDC, QBHSB?
We don't regulate sea turtles. But that's probably a fish and wildlife concern under the endangered species.
Okay. For the web-based application, what if an applicant does not have a middle name? Is the middle name optional?
Yes, the middle name is optional. We understand that there are some individuals that do not have a middle name, so that will not be a requirement for filling out the web-based application.
Okay. And this question is for Mr. Stevens. FedEx will refuse to ship the Category A package unless we list what is inside. Although it is not required by law, they will send the package back. How should this be handled?
You could ask them to show you in the regulation where they, you could ask them in the regulation where they are citing. Are we talking about what's in the box as a technical name? It says not to go on the package. All FedEx carriers know they do not have to see one on the package. On the shipping paper, at the same time, they should see either the technical name or, as I showed on the slide earlier, suspected Category A infectious substance. So again, something must be in the parentheses for the technical name on the shipping paper. And of course, those requirements are in 172.202 section of our book that you could reference him.
Is there an expiration date for the Category A shipping box?
No. Again, if your test report was done January 2011, we'll say that test report and any manufacturing is good for 2 years. Any manufacturing after say February 2013 must have a new test report associated with it. But if he made a bunch of packaging and manufactured them in Label Master or Uline or anybody else who is holding a bunch of the packages, it is still a good viable package as long as you have the current closure information and test information on it. Not a problem.
What happens if we have a new sender during the permit year? Can we amend our current permit or do we need to apply for a new one?
I'm talking for APHIS. If yes, you can amend your existing permit to change sender, shipper, or even in cases the permittee name.
For the CDC, we do allow the ability to amend pump permits under special circumstances. For additional senders that are not included on your original permit, we will ask that you submit a new application to add that additional sender to your permit if not originally indicated on the initial application.
And for pest permitting, they can amend these on a case-by-case basis, but generally, if nothing else has changed, we'll send an amended permit.
What are some of the organisms and vectors likely to warrant an inspection when applying for a VS permit?
All BSL-3 organisms would require inspection. There are some BSL-2s that would require inspection. We are working on getting a list of those organisms, but they would include things like PED virus, low-path AI, help me here, Delta coronavirus, swine Delta coronavirus, I'm blanking, lentogenic Newcastle disease virus, or I'm sorry, non-infectious Newcastle disease virus, that's the new nomenclature, Mycobacterium.
Okay. Is an import permit required to import trophies, mounts, rugs of animal origin?
In general, those items would be disinfected or rendered non-infectious prior to shipping, in which case they would not require a permit. If, on the other hand, they have not been rendered non-infectious and there's not an accompanying statement to that effect, then they would have to be permitted by us, yes.
If an applicant has evidence such as a certificate of origin for fetal bovine serum, will they still need to apply for a USDA permit? Can the certificate be submitted to justify an exemption?
No, unfortunately, we would not accept a certificate of foreign origin. We strictly require that FBS, if someone used, that has to be US, Canadian, or Australian origin, basically which are countries which are free of FMD. If something, an FCS or FBS is originated from a known FMD country, and they said that they have treated it, currently we are not accepting that.
Please discuss the proper procedures for applying for a CDC worldwide permit. Is it required that all senders be provided on Section B?
Yes, it is required for all senders to be provided on Section B. We do also have what we call a Section B continuation form that allows you to include multiple senders. We understand that there are some large entities that have over 300 senders, but unfortunately, for your initial application, we would like to know all the specific entities that you will be receiving material from.
And this question can be for everyone on the panel. Have you received fraudulent applications? If so, what actions are taken?
From APHIS, I have not seen any fraudulent applications so far. We have seen a lot of incomplete applications. So we encourage everyone when they submit the application, please be careful to provide every information that you think that it is necessary to support your application.
For CDC, since we've conducted these inspections, we started doing this in April of 2013. We have come into chances where we have encountered fraudulent applications or applications that were submitted incorrectly or with inaccurate information, I would say. So because of that, there have been situations where we had to revoke or suspend permits because of the information being inaccurate. or situations where we've discovered that places did not exist. So there is that possibility there, and we have put in parameters with our program to ensure that fraudulent application or application with incorrect information it does not receive a permit from our program. So yes, that has happened before for us, and we have since resolved those types of situations.
Has the DOT handout Transporting Infectious Substance Safely, dated 2006, been updated?
No, it hasn't, but it's as current as it was then.
Okay. Will the CDC and USDA continue to maintain separate import permit programs in the future?
Because the CDC and the USDA have separate regulations, the programs will continue to be separate. However, we will continue to work on collaborational projects to improve the communication among both agencies. For you all's awareness, we spent the last couple of days planning and coming with challenges and gaps for both agencies and how we can overcome those gaps together. And we've also planned future projects for all agencies actually that are at this table, and how we can move forward in the future about better collaboration between the agencies and improving the communication. So those are the types of things that we're considering to improve our efforts going forward, and we're hopeful that this will also improve the efficiency of the process for importation and continue to maintain a safe and secure importation process for everyone.
Is there a list of infectious disease, biological, bacteria, virus names to check if you need to import for import permit?
For rabies, no, currently we do not have one. As we mentioned before, that we are trying to create one. But one should remember that there will be never a complete list. Things are evolving, and today, which is not important or not, we do not consider pathogenic, maybe tomorrow it will be. So it will be always an working list, and which will be periodically updated. But currently we do not have one, and we are trying to make one as soon as we can.
For the CDC, currently we have a list, but as we all know, it's not an all-inclusive list, and we have tallied up agents from different public health agencies and scientific organizations. So we've come up with a general list, but not an all-inclusive list for applicants to use if they're filling out our import permit application. But I think everyone should be aware of that. This list is not all-inclusive, of course.
For the pest permits, we have a list in our regulated article database, which is an ever-changing list. But we encourage people to just send us an inquiry, and then we'll tell them the regulatory status.
If we already have a transportation security plan for hazardous materials, do we need a separate plan for select agents and toxins?
No, you would not. The only reason that you would have one is for the select agents in the first place, unless you were doing something under the 172.802 requirements. There's some applicability portions in there where if you're doing a PIH, poison inhalation, or you're doing vast quantities, anything 800-gallon package or more. But usually in this case, the only reason you have a transportation security plan is because you do the select agent. So by all means, that one should suffice. Now, if you have one for other purposes, you better include the information for the infectious side. Okay?
Are CDC import permits needed for domestic shipments of Mycobacterium tuberculosis like MERS?
I think there's two different things. I'll address the Mycobacterium tuberculosis. For importation of that, at this time, we are not requiring domestic approval or transfer authorization from the CDC for domestic transfer of Mycobacterium tuberculosis. Now for MERS specifically, if you are importing MERS into the country, we'll issue a condition of issues on your permit stating that you have to receive additional approval from our program prior to transferring MERS to another recipient within the United States.
For APHIS, excuse me, we are not permitting MERS at this time, and we will provide Mycobacterium tuberculosis permits.
And this is a two-part question for CDC. How long should an applicant allow after submitting an application to receive notification from the CDC on whether the permit is granted? The first case, an inspection is not required, and then the second case where an inspection is required.
Well, in both cases, honestly, you should receive notification one way or the other whether or not you're going to receive an inspection. Typically, you receive notification from our program within 7 business days as to whether or not an import permit, an inspection is required. Of course, there are times where it may take a little longer depending on the specific workload. Now, just for approval of a permit that does not require an import permit, it usually takes us about 7 to 10 days. A lot of times less than 7 days if there is no errors on that specific application. But of course, there are many times where there are errors on the application. It may take a little bit longer for the permittee to receive that particular permit because we have to wait on a response for the permittee. So a lot of this also depends on the permittee themselves and whether or not they respond in an adequate amount of time as to how long it would take us to issue the permit without the inspection.
This question is for Susan Loring. Does the CDC provide preferred vendors for failure testing?
No, we're not giving recommendations of who to hire. There are a lot of companies out there that do that type of testing, but there's no requirement to hire an outside company either. As long as you have personnel on site who have sufficient knowledge about how your own HVAC system works, you can do the test yourselves.
The next question is also for Susan Loring. Is the HVAC failure testing required annually?
Our current policy states that once the failure tests are reviewed and approved, there's no requirement to perform them again as long as major changes are not made to the HVAC system or major problems noted with it.
And this is our question for CDC. With regards to the new online application regarding Section E, number 4, scientific name, is there any way to choose all of the below, or more accurately, all not including items requiring other specialized permits?
I'm assuming you're referring to the new web-based application that will be released very soon. But as of right now, selecting all of the above is not allowed. But I do think that it is an excellent idea that we will take back to the developers to consider using for applicants who are importing every single thing possible. So all of the above selection will definitely be something that we will consider for our new web-based application. So thank you for that recommendation.
Do we have to include en route security and transportation plan for hand-carried samples?
Oh, yes. Hand carrying, obviously, we're like the CDC, and we don't recommend that. We would much prefer you go to a certified courier, carrier, FedEx, whoever it might be. But there are instances out there we know where universities have distance situations. So when I do a check of your transportation security plan, you explain those things to me, I want to see it in writing too, to cover it. It may include doing things at midnight with police escort. We would love to see that you've got a good policy where it's a two-man concept while you're carrying this. Not to go out there alone and say, I can just run down the street 2 miles of FedEx all by myself at 5 o'clock and leave. And the package never makes it, you never make it. Let's have a transportation security plan that's going to cover that.
If my entity ships both toxins and controlled substances such as DEA regulated products, are there any restrictions on this being shipped in the same box?
A toxin and what in there?
DEA regulated substances.
Yes, we need to keep those separate. Your toxins are going to call for a different hazmat description, which will fall under normally toxin 6.1 material, unless it is an infectious substance toxin derived from a living source, etc., and it's still infectious. Then you would be changing the name to infectious substances affecting humans, 2814. So yes, by all means, ship them separately and classify them correctly. Is it 6.1 toxin or is it 6.2 infectious substance?
That concludes our question and answer portion of the webinar. Thank you.
If I may, just catch people up on things if you haven't already. The Ebola issue obviously is a subject of interest today. CDC, all of these agencies have been working diligently with the DOT on how are we going to handle this for transporting it away, whether it's an apartment full of materials or whether it's regular bag trash of some sort. Obviously, this is not regulated medical waste. Regulated medical waste and infectious substances are one and the same. It's how we classify it. If it is a category B infectious substance, we can change the name when we're going to waste to regulated medical waste and UN 3291. Category A infectious substance cannot be changed over to regulated medical waste. Thus, it would have to go out in those same specification packages that we spoke about before. When the package is not large enough to handle the contents of what you are getting out, we have come up with, working diligently with respective haulers out there, special permits. Special permits are allowed by the regulation in a little deviation, a little compromise to where we're not going to comply with the regulation, but we're going to be just as safe with it during the transportation. So if the carrier can provide this safe enough for us to recognize it, we will allow a special permit for them to do certain things. Different haulers have gone in specifically because we had immediate things to take care of, and we provided packaging exceptions and specifics about how to handle these Ebola contaminated issues. There is a standard special permit now out. It is on our website. 16279 is the number, and only the haulers can technically have this, and they will have to apply to us to be a party to this special permit in order for them to haul it in anything but a Class 6.2. Class 6.2, as I talked about the special testing requirements, these are tested requirements also, but to a lesser standard, what we call a packing group 2 standard. So we will allow triple packaging with certain tested thick bags. We will talk about disinfectant. We will talk about closing the package securely. And we'll talk about securing it on the load. Everyone must be trained on the operation of the special permit, who will be carrying it, and also the shipper, which is why I really want to bring this up, because you are going to be still signing the certification statement that you're shipping infectious substances affecting humans and that it has been packaged and ready for transportation in accordance with this special permit. So when a hauler comes in, you've got the situation, and I'll ask for this special permit. You can get it off the website, study it, etc., but it is out there. Also, the DOT has put out on our website some general DOT guidance for preparing your packages for Ebola contaminated waste for transportation. So this is on our website also. Please look it up, and it's general requirements, obviously. And there have been several haulers who have already come in to ask for party status on this general special permit, if you will. But currently, because of the situation in now New York, but out in Texas and here in Atlanta, we had to address these issues immediately. And those special permits are normally valid for about a month or 2 months. This general guideline or the general special permit will normally cover about 2 years operation to handle this. So that's what the DOT has on their website. If you're interested, please go on it, and you can go to our special permit section under permits and approvals and type in 16279 and get a copy. Thank you.
Our Deputy Director of the Division of Select Agents and Toxins will give the closing remarks. Mark Hempel.
Thank you, Lourdes. In providing the closing remarks for today's import permit webcast, I first want to acknowledge our federal partners from the Department of Agriculture, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, or APHIS, the Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, and the Department of Transportation, Office of Hazardous Material Safety, and of course our CDC colleagues from the Division of Global Migration and Quarantine. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to participate in today's webcast. It's much appreciated. I also want to recognize Vaughn McClee, the CDC Import Permit Branch Chief, and Diane Martin, our Division Training Coordinator, for making today's webcast possible. Thank you. For those that registered and listened to today's webcast, I hope today's webcast provided you with a better understanding of the regulatory requirements for the importation of substances, vectors, or animals that contain or may contain human pathogens or an agricultural pest or agricultural pathogen. I also hope that this webcast also gave you a better appreciation of why these regulations are important for the safety and security of our country. In summary, you heard today from the Department of Transportation that they provide regulations for packaging and labeling requirements for the transport of pathogens to ensure that those handling the package during its travel from overseas into its final destination in the United States are not exposed to its contents. Or if that package becomes damaged during transit and does leak its contents, we immediately know what was in the package, so appropriate steps can be taken to minimize the risk to the person potentially exposed and to the surrounding environment. The permits issued daily by APHIS and CDC help ensure that the recipients of these packages in the United States have the appropriate facilities to safely handle and contain these pathogens. And the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, along with APHIS and DGMQ inspectors at the ports of entry, daily screen these packages coming into the United States to ensure compliance with these regulations. Regulations that are designed with the ultimate goal of protecting the United States public and our agriculture from the exposure or spread of these pathogens. This is our second webcast devoted to the import regulations. We want to hear from you so that we may improve future webcasts to meet your needs. Those that registered for today's webcast will receive an email from ipwebcast@cdc.gov with a link to a survey. Please take a moment to complete the survey and provide us your valuable feedback on today's webcast. And lastly, a video of today's webcast, the PowerPoint presentations of the speakers, and the answers to the questions that we received from you during today's program will be posted on the website shown on this slide in approximately 3 to 4 weeks. All registered participants will receive an email notification when this material is posted on the website. On behalf of everyone that made today's webcast possible, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this important information and to ask questions. This concludes the 2014 Import Permit Webcast. Thank you.